Welcome, everybody, to this special edition of the Alex Thomas Show. I don't know if special is the right adjective. It's unique, unique times that we're in. The events in Apple Ridge, just the state of law enforcement in the country, especially Washtenaw County. Been in Washtenaw County since 1976. I had a friend in the late 90s that was killed by the police in West Willow, Clifton Pete Lee. I remember Aurora Rosser. I have an experience with law enforcement here in Washtenaw County, so it's just incredibly personal. So that's why this is a unique edition. With all that I just said, the guest that, excuse my rudeness for not introducing her, I'm going to tell you why I called her. I know that she knows these issues from the view that I want to talk about. Those social determinants of health, social work, the relationship of law enforcement to vulnerable populations. That's what I'm interested in talking about right now, because I mentioned that past that I know about of law enforcement in Washtenaw County. So I'm looking at this long-term and structural and systematic. To get an absentee ballot, talk to someone if you don't understand, and talk to that person that's so passionate about politics and that always trying to get you to vote that you don't listen to. But those incidents that I mentioned, there were protests around those. Our biggest chance to impact things is this August 4th. So I'm sorry, Tracy Vandenberg. Please, no. Passionate times. I'm gonna let you introduce yourself. Go forward, and we're going to talk about things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an extremely difficult time for our community, for our country. It's beyond words, just really, sorry. How disturbing the racism and the things that are going on. And it's of course, it's nothing new. And it's nothing we haven't seen before. And we keep saying we have to do better, and we're not. And now we see, and there have been incidents before in Washtenaw County, but I think that, sometimes in Washtenaw, we try to think we're above the fray, we're enlightened, and that these things don't happen here. And they do, and they are. So, my background, I'm a clinical social worker as well as an attorney, worked for many years at Legal Services of South Central Michigan, working with vulnerable populations. And I've had many conversations with my clients about their interactions with the police. And I've seen the issues in terms of equal access to justice for people of color, people who are vulnerable. And we have to do better. And I'm so glad that, I have a lot of ideas, as I'm sure we all do. And I'm just really, I think the more we talk about it, the more, well, we can't just talk about it, but we need to talk about it. We need to also talk about things that are uncomfortable. And I will say that, frankly, especially as a white woman, listen, I have unearned assets that I can count on cashing in on every single day, and that I'm not really supposed to be aware of, right? And it is white allies. It's not enough to go out and protest next to people. That is not good enough. What we need to be doing is we need to talk to other white people about their privilege. And we shouldn't put it on our brothers and sisters of color. It's not their responsibility. It's our responsibility to check this. So sorry, I know I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but it is our responsibility when people try to minimize, when somebody says to me, oh, all lives matter. It's my responsibility to say, okay, you said that, you don't get it. And let me tell you why. So anyway, I'm glad we do this, Alex, but
yeah,
I just feel so passionate about that.
I get guests on. I try to get guests on that I don't like, that I disagree with, but it doesn't. It never works out. But I'm always asking the people that I really do like. And the point that I did like about what I like, besides your intelligence, breadth of knowledge, just from the heart and passion, I saw that you really understood this issue. Like sometimes, if you're going to say stereotypical white liberals in Ann Arbor, uh, you're not in that group. You don't need to read the
Well,
book
thank
White Privilege. That term. I remember Nathan McCall's book, Make Me Want to Holler, in like 1990. That was 23 years ago. This rhetoric, so that's almost a quarter of a century we've been talking about that term white privilege in Ann Arbor, and that liberal crowd, that so-called progressive crowd. And growing up here, I've always known that there's definitely an extreme amount of rhetoric around social justice issues, left-wing
yes,
causes. I mean, that defines Ann Arbor, that rhetoric. But there is some reality. There's some hardcore people there, and that's who I want to talk to today. And in that audience, I think the way they look at this and understand the structural, systematic issues involved, and that I think
yes,
poverty, and that's what I like to jump off with your expert opinion and dive
sure.
in. If someone just was sitting next to you in some event activity, and they say, how does poverty impact the criminal justice system, or what's the relationship? What are the issues there? Like, what comes to Tracy Vandenberg's mind, like that you would want to educate them on? Poverty
Well,
and criminal.
yeah, absolutely. Poverty affects every aspect of the criminal justice system. We know that people who are poor are disproportionately have contact with the police, whether that's because they live in less stabilized environments. We also know that people who are poor have difficulty accessing the justice system, difficulty getting equal representation. I mean, we can start with the really obvious thing about bail. Let's talk about bail. I mean, what is bail really? In most cases, bail just says rich people can get out and poor people can't. Now, I'm not saying, so right there, and what happens with minor, oh, go ahead, Alex, sorry.
Well, I mean, and the idea is to keep, supposedly for a safer society, keep dangerous people from getting out. But it doesn't keep us, it keeps rich people
That's right.
from being held accountable because they're out. And it keeps innocent poor people in because they can't
Right.
afford to get out. And also, in this, I'm really a big Eli Savage supporter.
Mm-hmm.
Part
He's
of that
terrific.
understanding that systematic impact and in helping them and being educated about the prosecutor's race, there's all these different epiphanies where I'm like surprised that I'm surprised. and
Yeah.
and one of them was seeing how the prosecutor's budget is double that of the public defenders. And talking to public defenders on, just in your experience, like I'm wondering how, I don't know if you were you were a public defender,
I,
weren't you?
I worked in the public defender's office very, very early in my career. I actually was an extern there, but I worked in civil legal services with low-income individuals, but I'm
What would you
familiar with both offices.
in Washtenaw County, what would you just ballpark like the average caseload in terms of numbers, like in a year for a public defender?
Oh,
Because when I
God.
heard those, I've talked to a few people, and just like on an average or a range of how one public defender, how many cases they could be responsible for at a given time. I don't think the
So,
audience knows.
hundreds. And I would say this, our public defender, and this is, again, where it's like, first of all, we have a Delphia Simpson, who is a friend and is just really wonderful and really committed to all, to making sure people have excellent representation. And this is the crazy thing. I mean, our public defender in Washtenaw County is considered the best in the state. And they still need more resources.
I'm sorry, I giggle there, but I think I've just met some heroes and some of the most passionate. I just have so much empathy for so many of the public defenders that I've
Yeah.
met. But it's like in any field, you have a mixed bag, and I think a
Yep.
lot of the public's experience is that that a public defender is just not going to fight for you that so much. And I've
Yeah.
met so many people that's I mean, they're doing absolutely the best they can under an incredible caseload, and you have some real champions in there. So I don't want to bash public defenders at all. I mean, they're
Oh, I know that.
incredibly difficult. I know you were, but I giggle when you said, because I know the public's reaction. A lot of the people's experience with public defender, and I can know a personal friend that, they're just constantly trying to get them to plead, and you're not even interested
Yes.
in the guilt or innocence. But you have champions, so go ahead, public defenders.
No, you're absolutely right, Alex, and I've heard that as well. I was forced to take a plea. I've heard that too many times. And what I was going to say is that I agree, we need to do better. Not only, so Washtenaw, this is still going on, and it's one of the best in the state. So all I'm saying is imagine what it's like in other areas. In Detroit, oh my God. I mean, it's like churning people through the system, plea. As you probably know, Michigan was under a consent decree from the federal court because we basically, we had no adequate representation for people, criminal representation, which you're entitled to a lawyer. So Michigan has been one of the worst states. We're trying to claw out of that, but the reality is the prosecutors' offices have so much more funding, have so many more resources, and then the entire system really is, they have so many more advantages than the public defense system ever has. So absolutely, people plea out who are innocent all the time.
The thing that surprised me, excuse me, the thing that's one of the things that surprised me, the caseload, like I spoke to a public defender that had like a couple thousand cases at one time, because you have open cases and active, and so it's, people are constitutionally guaranteed or entitled to, and correct your attorney, an adequate defense is my understanding, and that just does not happen in Washtenaw County. It doesn't happen in America with people that can't afford their counsel. So you have that caseload. And then looking at the budget of the prosecutor's office, that was another one. And seeing, and you can correct me or educate me on this, but it seems systematically designed to go after poor people. Meaning if you're a person of means, that can adequately defend yourself or match, they may decline to, or not decline to prosecute, make a different decision, so get those numbers. And that's the moral part to me as I've designed to go after poor people, to get those numbers.
So I mean, it just, the whole system is slighted against poor people. The civil system, any time that you go into court unrepresented and somebody else is represented, whether it be by a prosecutor, whether it's your landlord who has a landlord's attorney, you are at a disadvantage. So across the board, in every aspect of our, and I say this lightly, justice, because it's unequal justice. There is not equal justice for poor people, or people of color are disproportionately affected in our state, in our county, in our country. So you're absolutely right. So the question is, how do we change that? And some of that is some of it is more funding for public defense, making that a priority. Some of it is we sorely need criminal justice reform. As you know, being in Scio Township, 86%, I think I have this number right, of 14B district court's budget is from fines. Those fines are mostly on the backs of poor people. I can tell you that. And
what makes that so outrageous, if you can educate the crowd, like some Ann Arbor courts in the more affluent areas, like what percentage of theirs? My understanding that it's much lower.
It is.
And that's just outrageous, and that we can't. But I've talked to some smart people, and there's always a stutter, and you thought it's so complex. I don't know those first steps on how to change, besides raising hell about it first, but in that room, how do we take that apart? But, I'll let you go.
Well, first of all, I mean, there are ways we know how to take this apart. Okay, there are lots of things we can do. I mean, we can't, obviously, we're probably, Alex, you and I are not going to solve poverty anytime soon, or systemic racism, but we can, we can start to do concrete things. One, we need bail reform. Absolutely, we need bail reform. Washington, D.C., and it's not a perfect system, but because algorithms actually can tend to have implicit bias, so you have to be a little careful with that. But between the use of an algorithm and a judge to decide whether people are a danger to society, and you really have to use both, because if algorithms are based on prior skewed data, not to get too wonky here, that's already wrong. You got to be careful that you don't continue to generate that implicit bias against people of color in the current algorithms. But
the people that are, Tracy, the people that are there's just anti-algorithm, what's their alternative? Just for individual judge do risk assessments?
Well, that's it. So I think when I've looked at this issue, because I think it's very, very important, is that you don't want to get too you want to make thoughtful choices, and frankly, there's no perfect system. We're not going to eliminate implicit bias. We're not going to eliminate systemic racism in one fell swoop. I wish we could. We all wish we could. The one thing I said to somebody one time, they said, "I'm not biased." I said, "We're all biased. And the fact that you don't think you have biases is terrifying to me," because it was a public official. I'm this and that. I said, no. I have implicit bias. It's, I was raised, just the culture I was raised in, I have to have implicit biases. But what's important is where we start making the most mistakes is where we don't recognize that. Because what we need to be doing is checking ourselves all the time. Why am I making this decision? Why am I doing this? Is this accurate? Is somebody pushing my buttons? Now I'm kind of going off topic, but that was kind of an old social work thing. And I'm, just maybe in terms of social work, when I used to treat people and say they said something and I really I didn't show it, but I had a strong reaction to it. I was like, oh, this client is really making me a little irritated. What I did after that session is go back and reflect and say to myself, what about this client who I'm here to help is kind of upsetting me? Is this something about me? Let me check my biases. And most times, that helped me become objective. So anyway, all our algorithms, all of these things have biases, but I think if you take a two-pronged approach, looking at using a risk assessment and then having a judge in terms of bail who's aware of bias and is actively thinking about that, you can make more accurate decisions. Oop, I lost Alex.
Alrighty, we're back here with Tracy Vandenberg. I had a little technical difficulty, but we were talking about poverty and how it impacted the criminal justice system, or actually, you get back where you notice the screen froze, because I lost my train. You can pick up where you left off. If you recall.
Yeah, so we were talking, I was just talking a lot about bail reform as a one concrete thing that we can implement. Right off the bat, the legislature, and there is a task force, I do want to say, in Michigan that has suggested their recommendations are that we have bail reform in Michigan. So I'm hopeful that that's coming.
Didn't we have five counties? It was that there was there was a test program last year, my understanding, in 5 different courts in Michigan where they did no cash bail. And I'm curious, how those 5 were selected and why Washington wasn't. If you have any idea.
That's a really good question. Because as far as I know, it's been very, very successful. There hasn't been any increase in crime. And by the way, every study, people have to understand this, every study shows bail does not reduce crime. Okay, keeping people in jail does not reduce crime. Let's be clear. Because, bail reform doesn't mean everybody gets released. It doesn't. It just means that people who are not a risk to the community are released as they should be. People who are a risk to the community are still put into jail. And but the majority of people can be released. So I think that's really important. I don't know why Washtenaw wasn't chosen. I don't want to guess. But, but I would certainly think that, change needs to come from the top. And I can certainly say that. So, and obviously I haven't had this conversation with Brian Mackey, but I haven't heard that he wants to implement bail reform. I don't know what his position on that is, but I'm being, you're funny.
I don't think so.
But, I haven't seen any movement out of that office for bail reform. That's all I can say. So I can just say what I see. I haven't seen it, but we need it.
I wanted to get it. Like, I try to get like maybe 20 seconds of Fox News in, and
a lot. That's a lot.
During the Mueller investigation, Hannity had up the Mueller crime family chart. Where you put in his BS and his total bullshit conspiracy propaganda to this right-wing audience. But it made me think of, we need like a bad actors Washtenaw County chart. And I'd love to know the bail companies in Washtenaw County, and see the relationship, see who they donate to, and, how vocal where they're connected to, and make it public. Because like you said, bail, it doesn't make us safer. And all it does is keep innocent, poor people in jail and let rich people, guilty people out.
And I'll tell you what else we need, and this is really important, and in any kind of criminal justice reform, police reform, and I know we haven't seen this, is we need data. And I know that sounds, again, a little wonky, but across the board, studies show that you need to be looking at your data. Are we overcharging people of color? I'm guessing we are in Washtenaw County.
Give some county data, because I don't want to say, as far as the racial inequities in the jail, as far as, do you know some offhand?
I don't. As far as I know, our prosecutor's office is not, I have not heard that they are collecting any data. I do know that is one of the platforms of one of the, at least one, and I can't speak for both. I just happen to know that Ellie Savitt, that's one of his missions, is to
8 times more likely to have cash bail, is my understanding, through the Washtenaw, statistically through the it was a 2017 report that the year of 2017, and think about I think like 69% of the jail was African American. 2.5 times more likely to be in for suspended license. There's just ridiculous disparities. And across the country, but within Washtenaw County, in relation to surrounding counties, we have ridiculous inequities, and that's the thing.
And we need data, though, not just on those things, and I absolutely agree that data's out there, but on charging, on sentencing. So we need to, really, and that data needs to be going up on the prosecutor's website for everyone to see. So we don't have to go find it. If they have it, it should be out there in the sunlight.
I told Ellie there should be an app, and he was like, "Yeah, there should." And he's about it that way.
Absolutely. But the other thing, we were talking a little bit about. So in terms of criminal justice reform, we have to decriminalize many of these low-level offenses that are misdemeanors. That is a suggestion. There should not be any criminal penalty for example, driving while license suspended.
Bingo! Yes. Yes.
No, ruined more lives and families than probably any other criminal statute. It is just, I cannot tell you, because it's just, I always used to try to explain poverty to people who just didn't get it. I suggest people go to do the poverty simulator, because, you know, people just don't get it. They don't get that you know, most people who are poor are working full time. This isn't like this whole idea.
Two or three
I
in
was
the
gonna
child
swear. I
care.
was gonna swear. But this whole idea where they started with the Republicans and the welfare queens, that we've been just sold this nonsense about poverty and about people who are poor. People who are poor are working 2, 3 jobs and they're still not making it. And you know what? They're one car repair away from being homeless and having their family just completely decimated, or one driving while license suspended. And, you know, a couple days in the county jail on a driving while license suspended, which often your license gets suspended for nothing to do with bad driving. Okay, that's just insane, but it gets suspended for a couple tickets. And of course, you're poor. You're barely making your rent. You don't pay the ticket, then your license gets suspended. And it is just this avalanche of events. And then you're in jail for a couple days. You can't pay the bail. You can't pay the fines. You lose your job. What happens to you? The next thing, you're evicted. And then you're homeless with your family. And then you know what happens? CPS comes, because you're homeless with your kids, and then they take your kids. And this happens to poor people in this county every day, and this country. And people have to understand that,
You know what
this whole idea that poor people aren't working hard, or somehow it's pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that's just a lie that people have been told about poverty.
I implore anyone that thinks that they say and they use the rhetoric that they really care about the vulnerable people in Washtenaw County. I implore you to go do the research on the driver responsibility fee.
Yes.
And how
yes.
that story. And for that driver responsibility fee was a fee that was imposed by the state on top of already having a suspended license. And it had such a pernicious effect, such a damaging effect. After, how long was it in existence? For 7, 8 years?
As long as I've been around.
So someone would have to have on top of the already a couple thousand, maybe another $2,000. So you're someone going to pay $3,000-$4,000 to have to get their license back. The state realized that they can't just extract that much wealth from poor people. It's not tenable, so they pulled back. But I look at that. That's a microcosm of the whole system.
You know, there's been a court case that says we can't. You know, we can't incarcerate people simply because they can't pay. Thank goodness. But
they can't get in your pocket that much and have an economy that survives. You know, that's what, or a system that survives. But I really think that, I mean, that's like the canary in the coal mine. As far as how law enforcement extracts wealth, entry into the system extracts wealth from poor people unnecessarily.
And I think it also is another reason that law enforcement, you know, they spend, I think the stats are 80% of law enforcement, 80 to 90% of law enforcement's time is dealing with minor infractions. So what does that mean? And I mean, so what we really want law enforcement for is dealing with violent crimes, right? We all want to be safe. Everybody wants to be safe in their neighborhood. Nobody, you know, there's nobody rich, poor, person of color, white, nobody wants to like have gunshots going around. I mean, this is, but like 80 to 90% of law enforcement is actually dealing with minor nonviolent crimes, citations, you know, sleeping in the park, drinking in public, breaking curfew. And, you know, and disproportionately, law enforcement goes to poor neighborhoods and has interactions with the public on these very minor they shouldn't be criminal, but they're criminal in our codes, a lot of them. So again, now we have a situation where low-income individuals are more likely to have contact with law enforcement. So those contacts are even greaher.
Because I can hear a portion. Excuse me, I can hear a portion of our audience, or some, probably not our audience, but there's a part of that they'll say, well, there's more crime there. There's more crime there. And in this education in the prosecutor's race, looking at data, in like so-called high crime areas, I know in Ypsilanti Township, if you look at the number of proactive stops, meaning that they're not reactive as a result of a
Mhm.
call or something like that, it's ridiculously disproportionate as to other
Absolutely.
parts of the county. So that's just for traffic offenses and pulling over and the broken tail light. So it's
Yep.
that high police presence that creates that revenue generation,
Mhm.
extracting extracting wealth out of the most vulnerable, that we can't continue. So go ahead.
Absolutely. And so that's why you're right. If they're stopping one group more, of course you're going to have more crime stats. It's self-reinforcing. It's not necessarily reality, right?
Yeah.
Which is exactly what you're saying. So one thing, for legislative reform, if we can decriminalize more things, and the task force on is actually suggesting that we need to, we need to give police, and I know it's going to sound bad, but more discretion not to arrest people, not to charge people, not to stop people. And we need, and not just discretion, it needs to come from the top. And I'm not saying it isn't, but that, these things are not priorities. Like these things, we're not going to spend, a lot of our time on these things. And look, I mean, how can, and then the other thing is, these things that happen, I mean, how can anyone in the community, how can any person of color not feel that the police are on their side?
Yeah.
How can they feel like the police are there to help them in the current environment? They just simply can't. There needs to be an acknowledgement that, the systemic racism that has invaded this country and this police department, that it is absolutely 100% rational, fair, and accurate for people of color to feel as if the police aren't there to help them. That
You
makes
know,
sense. That makes
and
sense. And we have to acknowledge it.
to give a little personal narrative around it, I was in a focus group, and well, it was in a Zoom, and I was asked my first thoughts about law enforcement, like in my life. And
Mhm.
what I did, I put a picture of the little Fisher Price toys, the policeman, because
Yeah.
that's my first idea, and it represented. I grew up in a home that to respect the police, and the police were good guys, and then here in Washington County, I played junior league football. At 12, 13 years old, all of my coaches were Washington County deputies,
Mhm.
and African American too, by the way. And I actually considered that. I was, police are cool. Was until 15, 16, and the profiling and stopped. I've been pulled over about 50 times in my life. That was pre-camera in 1980. I was 15, 1984, 16, 1985. Car search, absolutely no Fourth Amendment rights. Everyone ID'd.
Yeah.
So that was the status quo. So as a 50-year-old person and anyone that lived in this county for a long time, what you just spoke to, not feeling safe and feeling or not feeling as if the police is your friend, that's been the experience. And I think that resignation that it's nothing's going to change. That's yeah, it's justified. I say that feeling is justified,
Yeah,
but it's
exactly.
not. There's no justification, I think, for not doing anything. I mean, we have to change this system, or else people
Absolutely.
are going to die. Really,
People are dying.
yeah.
I
In
mean, I
Washington
mean,
County, again, yeah, people are dying naturally.
I, and I say that, I mean, I, Sheriff Clayton, I was so excited to see today. I don't know if you saw this, but he's done one of the things that are actually known to decrease incidents of police misconduct in this current case with Ms. Grady L and her husband. So he has asked the Attorney General's office to bring in and do an independent investigation. And that is a real credit to him. He's a really, we can recognize that we have good people in the department, but we still have a lot of work to do. And the reason that's important, frankly, is what we need. One of the reforms in terms of police misconduct is that every state really should have an independent basically an independent prosecutor or an independent office of review of police misconduct. Where that office, that's all they do. They only investigate police misconduct. And why that's important is because you do not want local prosecutors investigating these cases. The prosecutors and the officers work together every single day. You just cannot get an unbiased, or it's very hard to get an unbiased investigation. So, you know,
I don't know. As a Washington County law enforcement, not sheriffs, but Ann Arbor. I mean, sheriffs, Ann Arbor, any municipality has a police brutality case or prosecuted for mistreatment. I don't know the numbers on that, but
I don't
you know,
either.
I can't remember one. I can't remember one.
No.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned Sheriff Clayton, because someone had asked me at a time after something I had written. They said, "I'm not sure. I can't tell if you like Sheriff Clayton or not." And I said, "Hell yeah, I like Sheriff Clayton."
Yeah, he's
But I said,
terrific.
but personal shit has nothing to do with it. When we're talking about the relationship of law enforcement and government and decision making, and that's what I was talking about in that conversation. And I told them that I think that as an advocate and just a regular citizen, I think you should, you know, partner robustly in good faith with the sheriff's department, law enforcement, to have the safest community possible. But in politics, I want law enforcement out of there. They should inform the discussion, but they shouldn't be part of forming it and deciding it. And I think there's law enforcement overreach here in Washington County. And that's why I want people to register to vote for the absentee ballot. I want them to know who their county commissioner is. And I want them to take that same passion that they have out on the street and continue it on and read up and understand these and really impact these issues.
Yeah. And we
But
can't deny, I mean, listen, I know many of the initiatives that Sheriff Clayton has worked to put into place, and you know, I mean,
yeah,
fantastic. And Derek Jackson, amazing guys.
He's got a great TED Talk, everybody. Look at
Oh, go ahead.
search. I was telling everybody, you know, he is awesome, Derek Jackson. I mean, if you see,
social worker and police officer makes a huge difference, by the way, because he's coming at this at a whole different perspective, right?
Yeah, people can Google Derek Jackson TED Talk. I'll put the link in here after if he doesn't mind. Let's see. But he does a great TED Talk on the social determinants of health and related to crime and the root causes.
Yes,
so
he's amazing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't negate the fact of the experiences. So I think these two things can exist together, that we can do better. Of the experience of Mr. and Mrs. Grady L. That doesn't negate the fact of what happened to them. That doesn't negate the fact that you were stopped disproportionately over and over and over again in your lifetime in this county. So that means we have to do better. I think one thing that when I think about, we always talk about training, and training isn't everything, but it is important. Officers have when they go to officer school, they spend about 60 hours on learning how to handle a weapon, right? But they only spend about 8 hours learning how to de-escalate situations. And that is just not enough. It really isn't. De-escalation training is critical, but it has to be ongoing. It has to be more than 8 hours. And frankly, in the current environment where people of color just basically are inherently traumatized just because they're a person of color, and all these indignities that they have to experience in their life that I haven't had to experience, you have to realize that every time the police interact, not you, but I mean, people have to realize every time the police interact with someone of color, it's a traumatic experience for that individual. And when people, this is something I talk about because I'm really interested in having, a trauma-informed court. Because when people are traumatized, they react in all different kinds of ways. And sometimes it's not a perfect reaction. Sometimes they overreact. Sometimes they underreact, because that is a sequela. I mean, that is the effect of being a traumatized individual. And I would put it out there that most of our communities of color have experienced trauma. And so police need to be other. even if it's in this, the small indignities every day. And so police need to be trained in being trauma informed so that they can truly communicate in a way where situations are not escalated. So it's more than an 8-hour training.
I was just talking about this with a social worker the other day about a resident that I visited. She's there with her adult special needs son, and is a domestic violence survivor. When the police and she has warrants related to traffic amounting to about $2,000 or $3,000 that she has no hope of paying anytime soon.
Yeah.
And when the police visited her home, they were just very disrespectful. And with that warrant out, that trauma that you were speaking to, that's she's incredibly aware that she could be removed from her home, child removed, loses what job employment she has. That's always there, and that's dictating that dynamic and those interactions with the cops, and that's what we can't. That's not how what that's further traumatizing a domestic violence survivor. And I'm sure you in your social work and as an attorney, you see.
Well, and so we need to help police change their thinking. So when they see someone acting out of the norm, right, or escalating really quickly, and I was trained as a social worker to think, when I see that, not that that is about me, I was trained to think like, so they say they're yelling at me, you're a terrible person, or cuss words or whatever, I hate you. And when I worked with adolescents in substance abuse programming, and I treated adolescents with substance, they would yell, curse at me, scream at me. And, I was trained to say, this isn't about me. So in my head, this isn't about me. It's not really about me. I mean, they may be mad at me right now, but this overreaction is really about a manifestation of trauma and addiction. And so if you see somebody like that, you can get out of your head that it's not about you. And we can train our police to feel that, to understand that, then the reaction is different. Because it's not personal. It's not like, oh, you're not going to do this to me. And it's not the overreaction. And then I know we almost need to we could have a whole nother hour on the idea of toxic, disproportionately police officers are male. I love men. This is not but we do have a culture of masculinity. We know, like, men, sometimes like to
Exactly.
battle it out, right?
Territorial, aggressive. I mean, I think
Right.
I mentioned that toxic masculinity. I think that definitely at play in the Vincent Alperidge. That was not de-escalation. That was, that was not. That was aggressive. That was toxic masculinity. That was ridiculous. That was.
Listen, and if you've raised boys and you've raised girls and you've seen the way that they interact, right? Or boys, like when they're like play wrestling, we have a culture of masculinity. And unless you're trained to look at it a different way, when you're confronted with what looks to be a threatening situation, even if it isn't about you, you may react with force, rather than getting into your head and saying, what is this really about? And what we need to do is we need to get officers the training they need so that they can make that next step, so they can de-escalate. 8 hours isn't enough. And they can start thinking about, this isn't about me. This isn't really about this person not following my orders. Like, yeah, maybe they're not following my orders, but like, it's not like, it's coming from somewhere else. And I think in a lot of situations, people who are victims of trauma, mentally ill, my Alexa's going off. Alexa off. Sorry. That's scary.
Great for music.
Yeah. But we need that training. And then the other thing, and I know we're running short on
what time do we have?
We got
11:02.
But
okay.
10
more minutes will do.
Yes, okay. If I could bring up one really brief program that I think is really, I love to research. I'm always trying to think in my life, how do I do better? What can I learn? And there's a psychologist who started a program. It's called Ethical Policing is Courageous. And I found this really really, really interesting. And I think it's had very, very, it's been very effective. In New Orleans, they had extremely high rates of police brutality. And, you know, the data was really off the charts. And so they brought in, you know, one of the things they brought in this psychologist to look at this, and they developed a program about active bystandership, sorry. And you saw this, I mean, you saw the complete failure of this in the murder of George Floyd. And I say murder because I know no one's been charged, but that man was murdered. He was. So anyway, and the other officer, like just the fact that other officer just stood there, frankly makes him just as culpable. But why is that? You know, and you got to ask yourself, if an officer is willing to take a bullet for another officer, like, even let's change the narrative. And I know it shouldn't be this thought process, but can we train officers that, listen, you'll take a bullet for your buddy, then why won't you intervene if he's doing something wrong? Like, even if, okay, so like somebody's gonna say, well, because they don't care. Okay, but let's take it a step further. What's going to happen to that officer? Hopefully, that officers, they all lost their jobs. They're all going to jail. So training officers to think not just like, I have to back up my buddy at all costs, but that ethical behavior. If that officer had stepped in and stopped that, primarily George Floyd would have been alive, which is the most important thing. But secondly, if we can train officers to think they won't be facing murder charges, they won't, you know, all this damage that's been caused, they would have had their jobs. All this could have been prevented. So this program looks at like kind of breaking into that blue wall, which I think is another component that's super important. You know, one of the things it teaches is to have discrete codes. So perhaps like when that officer was standing there, of course, we don't know what he was thinking. He was thinking, well, if I step in now, the crowd's going to be like, oh, he's, you know, not backing up his buddy. So in this program, they have like code words where they'd say like, you know, hey, buddy, we got a 5-4 call. That code word tells him you've crossed the line. You've crossed the line. It trains officers to do that. It trains officers to speak with coworkers about potential problems, about overreaction. And so what happens is with this training is the training overcomes, because it's a, you know, it's an ongoing long training. The training overcomes that blue wall of silence and that officer loyalty to each other. And I think something like that is it's been extremely effective in the departments that have done it, and is really critical, because we also need to get officers to intervene with their own. I mean, that's another component of this.
And that's just a real, because again, to our local sheriff's department, the awesome work that they do in the community outside of law enforcement, I really applaud. And you know, it really does engender a lot of goodwill. You know, I'm not letting them off the hook for what that individual incident in Apple Ridge and just that general police culture in policing.
Right.
But I do want to applaud the community work, and that's just outright. That's what makes it so disappointing, specifically locally. Like I had it when I originally heard about the Apple Ridge incident. For some reason, someone then told me that was Ann Arbor, and I automatically assumed, or in a different location, and I assumed Pittsfield Township Police, which I could have. I mean, you know, that's what I was thinking of. And then it's just really disappointing for it to be.
I know.
Washington County Sheriff's.
I mean, it's extremely disturbing. So, you know, the question is, you know, I'm glad to see people out at the sheriff's department demanding, you know, change. I'm really, as I said, really heartened by Sheriff Clayton doing, you know, which I'm not surprised, because he is someone who does the right thing, in bringing in an independent investigation. That's critical in these incidents. But again, I mean, we need to elect people who are willing to pass legislation for systemic change. I mean, there's other things. We need a robust police oversight committee. I believe that the county had one, but you know, the problem with these committees is a lot of times they have no teeth. So we got the oversight committee, but they can't do anything. So,
you get connected in elites and not really have an expertise or really a lived experience in all these issues.
They need to be made up of community members affected by these issues so that they can talk about, you know, they can actually talk about real world experiences. They need to not have police on them. Okay. It's a conflict of interest to have other officers, and they need to have teeth, meaning, you know, ability to independently investigate and discretion to, you know, recommend discipline. The other thing we need changes to our law so that when there are police bias incidents, that police can also be held civilly liable. You know, the immunities, and we can talk a lot about this, but the immunities given to the police are very, very high. And, you know, we certainly need, we need laws with bias where we can have more accountability for not just I mean, and when I say not, I mean, we need to deal with this not just when we see these horrific incidents. We need to have a way, all these little indignities, you know, and I say little, they're not unimportant. I just mean, you know, incidents of bias, there needs to be a mechanism to hold police accountable. And, you know, right now, you know, as a country and as a state, we don't really have that. So, you know, we need changes in the law there. So that's all those things really come down to electing the right people and getting the right.
Speaking of that, electing the right people, you know, I asked you on because of your social work background, an attorney, just that informed view, and I know that you care, and also because I definitely want to support you. And you know, you just said electing the right people. Please tell everybody the office. First, tell them the office and how important just that office is, and then tell them why you're so awesome for it. Because everybody vote for Tracy Vandenberg. Please vote this August.
So nice.
No, we need you there, but tell them why that office, what you're running for, and why that office is so important.
So I'm running for Washtenaw County Circuit Court Judge, and it will be a family law docket. And so, you know, if I'm elected, or when I'm elected, I like to say, I'll be making decisions about when you see your children, child support, be having the personal protection order docket, basically, you know, protecting survivors of domestic violence. And so these are critical decisions. I think there are two things in the justice system that affect people more than anything else. One, losing your freedom, and two, losing your children. The fact that a judge could tell you when you can be with your family or with your children, or how you can interact with them, it's an unbelievable thing, and it's incredibly important. And so I'm running because I am absolutely committed to making decisions, to helping, first of all, to helping families. My social work background to stabilize families, to get treatment where people need treatment. I want to have social workers in my courtroom. I have a plan for that. I've done it before when I was at Legal Services. I supervised social work students who could help people get additional services to stabilize their lives. I want to do that, stabilize families, so we can keep
Just thinking it gives a really deeper understanding of justice, you know, what's supposed to happen in that court, you know.
And then the other thing, so stabilizing families, you know, helping people have self-determination so that we can make sure we're making the right decisions for families. And the other thing that's very, very, very important in these cases, well, in all cases actually, is the equal access to justice. 60% of the people who come to family court are self-represented. 60%. It is. So now you're talking about trauma. Somebody's deciding what to do with your children, right? You may either be in the middle of a divorce or just in the middle of a custody action. That's traumatic in itself. Now you're representing yourself in front of a stranger who you've never met, who is going to make this huge decision for you. So I plan to put in multiple safeguards. First of all my staff will be trauma trained and trauma informed. So that if people are having difficulties, I'm there to listen and help. I am not there to punish you. And I'm going to make sure that all my staff of course myself, are interacting appropriately. So that's one. Two, equal access to justice. I have a lot of ideas for, different programs. I want to do like monthly divorce and custody workshops just for people who are self-represented so they can get the lay of the land. I'd like to have an attorney, judicial attorney will be there to answer procedural questions for you. We cannot give legal advice, but we can give procedural advice, and I can have that person reach out if I need more information. Three, if you are unrepresented and the other side is represented, I will never let an attorney bully you, because I'm going to make sure I get all the information so that the right decision is made. All the information needs before the court. In terms of child support is an area where people are incarcerated, right, for not paying support. Who does that help? I'm not saying it's never, okay, in 90, I would say, I don't know if this is a real statistic, but my gut is like 95% of the people who aren't paying support are just struggling. It's not because they don't want to pay support. Okay, so for the 5% who just don't want to support their kids, that I'm not tolerating that. But for the 95% of good people who are having just difficulties, I don't want them in jail. I don't want them having their license suspended. I don't want them having their construction license suspended. I want to help you. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to have a problem-solving court. We are going to get different programs. Michigan Works, WCC. I'm going to liaison with different stakeholders that if you opt in to my program, we're going to help you get employed. And then we're going to do payment plans, and we're going to help you to get yourself on your feet. So not only can you support your child, but you can support yourself. And that also includes in cases where people aren't working because of physical disability or mental health issues, then we want to get you Social Security disability, because your child will get derivative benefits, and then that can charge against child support. So it's about, the expression rising tides lift all boats. Absolutely. That is really my approach. I want to help the children, and I want to help the parents. And I want to bring my social work background and legal background of almost 14 years of family law and civil litigation expertise to do that. And I promise I'll listen. And if I'm doing something wrong, I want Alex to tell me, and everybody else. That's important to me, being accessible to the community, because everybody makes mistakes. I will make mistakes. I know I will, but mistakes can be corrected. And judges work for you. I will be working for you if I'm elected, not the other way around. And
Tracy,
I remember that.
Is it circuit court? What's the exact title for that?
Washtenaw County Circuit Court Judge.
Okay, great.
22nd Circuit.
There was about 8 other issues that I could have got in there. So,
I'm sorry. I get excited.
I do too. We can do a couple hours at a time, or some kind of events. You know what? Really, actually, just that child support one, a child support Zoom.
Let's
I have
do
so
it.
many of those questions about, and because it's so much. Thank you, Tracy.
Oh my God, thank you. Sorry, I do get excited about stuff. Alex, you're so wonderful for having me. So happy.
Appreciate it. We'll see you again. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please vote August 4th. Sign up right now. Why did I say August 4th? You can right now today register.
That's
for your
right. Yeah, I say that too.
Yeah, register. Go to the Washtenaw County Clerk's Office website, register, get your absentee ballot application, get on the permanent list. It'll be sent out to you. You fill it back in. You'll be ready to vote from the comfort of your own home, and we can start affecting the system. Thank you, Tracy. Thank
Oh
you,
God,
everyone.
Alex,
Bye-bye.
thank you. And everybody, please stay safe and be well.
Uh,